community and always help share great events, and we hope to see even more companies here. I think maybe Comico is here, right there. Thank you, sir. Yep. Anybody else here from these? I think they just wanted to be here but couldn't. Lincoln, of course. But yeah, I recommend checking those out. They're all very much involved in the community in the way that I really respect all of them. Okay, so we'll just take a few minutes before we dive into the workshop. Who's hiring? Is there anybody else besides Sean? I thought somebody said there were. Yes, I knew I saw another one. All right, just stand up, tell us what kind of open positions you have and why should they come work with you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Steve Schwartz. I work at FreeWire. We're in San Leandro. I'm hiring the first member of my team, customer success. So looking for somebody with a little bit of experience, a couple of years with enterprise customers. We deliver concierge charging service to enterprise customers in the Bay Area, which means we charge employees electric vehicles. So if you have any questions about what we're looking for, come see me after the event.
Thanks, Steve. Maybe I'll just talk loud instead of echoing a lot. All right, so Engagio is where I work at. We are a B2B marketing company. Our CEO is the co-founder Marketo. We kind of think of ourselves as the next generation marketing automation platform. We're hiring both customer success managers and success engineers, which kind of technical support and CS operations mix. And so if you want to be a CSM or a success engineer at a fast-growing company, please come see me afterwards, and I'll be telling you more, all about it. So,
yeah, thank you. I don't know if we have another microphone, but if we, oh yes, but just in general, as we get into the fireside chat and the workshop, I think they're live streaming it, and so the microphone goes into the camera. But in your case, it won't matter.
Hi, everyone. I'm hiring, I work for Lastline, which is a cybersecurity software company in Redwood City, just down the street from here. And I am hiring my first customer success manager / director. So it needs to be somebody who's got, who's going to be a player coach, and it's somebody who can travel a lot because it's a global company. So come see me if you're interested. Probably we won't be filling the role for another couple of months, but we're starting the planning now.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Awesome. There's a few more executives here, so just find them afterwards. Usually we also have the CSMs introduce themselves and why should they hire, but I think today, since we have a special guest that flew here all the way from Dallas, we're just going to rush it a little bit. Sounds fine? You know who to hunt after that, like during networking. Good. Okay, so as you know, I'm just going to repeat, we do have the Twitter feed here. Don't forget hashtag, dear Lord, hashtag PulseLocalSV. Yes. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk a little bit about health scores. So how many of you already have a health score implemented at your CSM, for your CSM team? Okay, and of that, how many of you still do it in Excel versus in a system or manually updating it? Partially manual, like not completely fully automated? Okay. For those of you still sort of like left their hands for the automated piece, how many of you found the health score to be completely reliable? Okay. That's why you don't have one. All right. Okay, so let's talk about it a little bit, okay? So obviously there's always some a little bit challenges with the health score, right? So you had yours somewhat manually updated. Would you like to share a little bit, how does your health score structured? What is manual, what is automated? 100%. Can you talk a little bit about the health score?
So,
do you mind?
yeah, sure. So our health score We put it on a test for a trial management practice that we put in place last year and ran this beta for about 6 months. So we tried it out to develop, what it is we could do to understand the likelihood that a prospect would actually convert to a full-time customer. So what we used is a couple of factors that we tied into it. One was how responsive they were to our emails that we would send out. So we leveraged Pardot to track it, to see if they were actually opening any of our teases. And then there was also response rates of just like direct emails or calls that we would make. So that was one factor. And then the next factor was just how engaged they were with our product. And we just did something as simple as, are they actually logging in? How often are they logging in per week? And then so I work for the Associated Press, so we sell content. So photos, text, video content. And we identified a factor of how much content are they actually pulling down every day, and which users are pulling that down, and what are the gaps then with that. And then based on that, we said, yeah, that's about this score, and then put that down.
So I'm just gonna make a guess that you have thousands of customers.
Thousands of customers, not in the trial program, but thousands of, thousands.
The reason I keep looking at him is because he also has thousands of customers.
Yep.
So anybody that has thousands of customers and maybe the ARR is relatively low, whatever that means to you, maybe they're self-onboarding, they register automatically to your programs or could, typically what you would see is something like that. So how is it manual with thousands of customers?
So luckily we haven't gotten that far. So
Okay.
right now it's just manually we had about 100 customers that went through the trial. So,
Gotcha.
And the manual was me kind of
Going through the list. So ideally you actually sort of like piloting it
Yes.
manually
Yep.
with the hope that once you validate the approach,
Yep.
you will convert it to a completely automated
Yep.
version.
And honestly, we got to a point where we could predict whether or not the contract was going to convert or not. And we could predict so we were running
80%?
30-day trials. So yeah, about 80%.
That's good.
We were able to, even like within the first week, we often would know whether or not someone was actually going to convert with us. And then by the second week, we were pretty
Sure. It's
certain.
like at 90%
Yeah.
level.
And then, the rest of the 2 weeks, we were just kind of the final part of the 30 days, we were just going to roll it out. But
Got
we
it.
would kind of know that they're not going to. There was always, there was a couple that came out of left field there were a couple that came out of left field after the scores were pretty low. They were basically said they're highly unlikely to convert. And they suddenly, like in the last couple of days, was like, no, let's sign the contract, we're done. And they didn't do any logging in, no activity, no nothing. And it was just like, well, why did you just put me through all this work here? Why don't we just skip to that bit? So.
Awesome. So this is one type of a health score that's actually designated to help increase conversion rates. So in the high-touch world, this would be a health score that's just looking at the onboarding phase. Are they fully onboarded by the end of the onboarding stage? Sorry. All right, who else has a health score that either works or doesn't work, but maybe wants to share a little bit about the process of coming up with one? What was the thought process and how they approached it?
Hi, my name is Joe. I work with Cisco. And as you can imagine, Cisco has thousands and thousands of customers for thousands of products. And so I work in the security business group, and we're starting to roll out health scores for some of our security products. So the way we define health score is we look at the product and the telemetry that we currently get from the product. So we have like this endpoints solution that provides a lot of telemetry. And so we know how many licenses the customer's purchased, how many licenses they've actually deployed onto their endpoints, which sticky features they're using, how often they're using it.
Yeah.
successful for the reasons they bought the product. We have subjective elements to our health score as well, but I don't think they're that well defined yet. We also are implementing Net Promoter Score as a way to kind of understand our customers. Customers that are getting to their outcomes are probably more likely to recommend, but I'm not convinced that that's entirely scientific yet. And then products that don't have telemetry, we don't have a health score. But one interesting thing we do is we have this health score contour. So when a health score moves from a 2 to a 3, that's not necessarily a 1 increment movement, because in our contour, a 2 means something, a 3 means something completely different, a 5 means something completely different, right? And I think that's a good way to look at it. That's one of the things that I would consider kind of a best practice that the team that defines the health scores utilizes.
Do you mind if I double click on that a little bit, just
Sure.
so if I think I have some questions, probably others have some questions. How do you interpret the customer health score with the way it is designed now? What is the answer that the health score is really designed to answer? Is
The
it whether,
customer's using the product
or not?
or not.
It's not whether or not they're gonna renew.
No, because again, you know, the renewal to me is a function of, did they get to their desired outcomes?
Right.
And are they having a good experience with the product? The health score, just because they're utilizing 8 features, doesn't mean they're doing so with ease. They could be utilizing those 8 features and it's a pain in the butt and it's
Right.
costing them a lot of time and money. That's not an indicator that they're gonna renew.
So how useful is the health score for a CSM? And if it's not very useful for a CSM, who is it useful within the organization?
I think it's useful for a CSM because the customer's never gonna get value out of a product unless they're using it. So you have to know they're using it. If they bought an endpoint solution, they bought 10,000 endpoint licenses, they've only deployed 500 endpoint licenses, that's a good thing to know. Especially if 6 months, 8 months have gone by since they took delivery. Those are good things to know. So that's important. And based on health score, certain CTAs get triggered. We use Gainsight, so
Right.
certain CTAs in Gainsight get
CTA is a
triggered.
call to action
Call
for
to
those who
action,
don't have gains, yeah.
yeah.
It's like a playbook being triggered. Of course, I know that. The playbook being triggered once, yeah. Is the score reliable?
When the telemetry is good and you're using it for the purpose
It was
that
intended for.
it was intended for, yes.
Yes.
Right now, like one of the projects I'm working on now is figuring out how we can effectively capture, monitor, and track a customer's desired outcomes and the KPIs they want to use to determine whether they achieve that outcome or not. Because I think that's going to be more indicative of, is the customer being successful? And the closer we get them to their desired outcomes, and if we can quantifiably measure those KPIs, and sometimes, I mean, what I'd like to see is that we tell the customer things they don't know. Right? That's how you add value. That's how you
Absolutely.
become more of a trusted business partner than just a technology vendor.
And how many metrics do you have compiled into that overall health score?
That's in the work in process right now.
How many do you have now? 4, 6?
I'd say there's maybe less than 10.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Well, because a customer goes through a product journey. They onboard it, they configure it, they test it, they probably deploy a little bit in production, and then gradually they migrate off their legacy. So all those kinds of things are milestones in their product journey. So we want to have metrics around each of those milestones.
Got it. So you actually segregated,
Yeah.
calculated based on the stage. Does anybody else have a health score that's specifically targeted for specific stages? Consider that, yes. Thank you.
So we do divide it into 2 stages. We have both an onboarding stage and then, hey, it's been 3 months and you're onboarded, now what kind of stage. And so for our onboarding stage, we actually just have a few what we call like early success indicators or kind of warning lights that if these things are not met during the first kind of at different stages, that's probably a reason to go escalate to our VPs or to kind of our CEO and say, hey, you need to go and get engaged before this is totally off the rails 6 months down the road. Once the customer is onboarded though, we try to keep it pretty simple. We do have some product metrics that go into our health score. We have a relationship value as well. And so we just literally average the two down the middle and say, it's not perfect, but here's at least a sanity check for you to say this customer is probably pretty good, or they're probably pretty bad, we need to kind of look into it. So we do not use them for kind of predict renewals, but we do use them to kind of just sanity check, are things going the way they should be, and do we need to obviously escalate to someone or do something, get some professional services involved, or that kind of stuff, so.
So it sounds like the customer health score is designed to just raise a flag so you can double click to see if there's an issue and escalation is
That's
needed.
right.
And that's why it should probably be mostly true,
Yes.
because it just says, hey, this client needs some attention, go check to see if there's really an issue, or maybe there isn't.
Yeah.
But it's flagging so
So
that
like
they
the
can be
CSM would like
proactive.
forecast the account to be like, hey, I'm 95% sure they're gonna renew, but the account health is terrible. You know, our VP gonna, hey, are we sure this is actually going the way that you think it's going? That kind of stuff, so.
Anybody has a unique thing in their customer health score that potentially is unique for their company that they'd like to share? Behind you, Sean. If you could just share your name and where you're, what company.
Sure. Hi,
Just
my
curious.
name's Andreas. And something unique is not so much related to the company, but what else we're doing with the health score, which is not just looking at when someone is bottoming out, so that you have to engage with a rescue plan or some other call to action, but also actually looking at all the positive outliers. And what are they doing that makes them these positive outliers so that everyone can learn from them, and there's this feedback loop back to the deployment phase to make new customers and existing customers more productive, aka successful in the product. So it's not just the negative outlook, but also finding all those super champions that you have already in the customer base.
Awesome. So what kind of data points are you looking at, or source systems did you incorporate into that health score?
There are a couple of them. So the solution itself has some calling home features where we can see the utilization of licenses and can compare this against the number of licenses that were purchased.
Similar
And
to what
also-
Cisco
yes.
is doing?
Luckily for that solution, engagement means that you gain the value, the productivity that you were looking for, that you're not just kind of spinning your wheels. So we can tie some correlation there. But also into the health score goes, which is one of the manual things, because unfortunately it's not yet automated, from the support system, the number of tickets, if tickets are starting to age out, so that a customer is stuck there. And then also during the onboarding phase, where it's really more qualitative, but not taking all customers assumingly through the same journey. You have 6 weeks and then you're onboarded if you like it or not, type of thing. So promotion through various communities, not just one catch-all community, to help them to get early successes and then really ramp up into a productive state and go on from there. So it's a bunch of things throughout the customer journey at specific points that are looked at and is all put together. And as always, the weighting of the different factors and so is dark magic more than science.
Cool. Did anybody use predictive analytics to come up with a health score measure? Did anyone?
I
Yes?
had a previous company, not current.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you can share. Yeah.
I'm Donna Weber. So we had a predictive analytics vendor, and they were acquired by Cisco, so I can't work with them directly anymore. But we worked with them to create an algorithm through Salesforce, and weighted, really did an analysis of all the different touch points. So, did they take training? How often? What else have they bought? What about consulting? How many support tickets have they logged? And it was just really fascinating to see what rose to the surface. And at the time, I was the head of customer education, and the data showed that well-trained customers were 20% more likely to renew and had a 15% higher Net Promoter Score. And then it also brought in data that had web crawlers, so that it wasn't just what we thought, our relationship, but let's say they're doing great with us, but they're about to be acquired or financially not doing well. It brought that data in to give it a health score. So it was really accurate and valuable.
Well, we have Boaz Meor here. Boaz, do you use a health score at your company or previous companies?
Yes, we use a number of methods. We recently deployed. Can you hear me?
Can you cut? No, it's for the camera. Okay, so does anybody not know who Boaz Meor is? Boaz Meor is the one you want to follow on Twitter and LinkedIn and read all his blogs. And if he's on a conference that you're in and he's speaking, you want to go to his presentation. And with that.
Couple of points on health score. My perspective. I'm at a company that is fairly unique. We sell to governments, so our metrics and our usage patterns are not as clearly defined in metrics that we can report on to address health score. We have deployed a solution, Comicos, to assess the communications between us and customers, and we have predictive analytics that tell us, based on level of conversations, emails, meetings, etc., what's the likelihood that there is more need for communication between us and customers. We plan to add to that other metrics from support and etc., but that has been quite useful. We're early on that trajectory with that solution, but it seems to be very good. The other thing that we are doing that I think is fairly unique when I talk to other people in the industry is one of the most important metrics we found to success of a customer is what I call program expansion, which is not necessarily what the adoption statistics are, the MAUs and the usage, but rather what actions we take with the customer to drive their program expansion. So we are adding reports, we are expanding to a new division, we are adding a set of features that we launched, can the customer use it? And when we track which are the customers who are growing their program, how they use us, that's the best predictor we have found, and I've seen this in at least 2 companies in the past where this is the best predictor. It's kind of
How
the
do you
equivalent.
track that? Because that, like Joe from Cisco said before, that's really tracking the business outcome. So how do you,
So it's not so.
or maybe not?
It's not necessarily the business outcome, but it's the bucket of drivers that drive the business outcome. So the outcome is, whether the customer is using your solution and gaining value from it. I don't know how to measure that today.
Got it.
What I do know is if the customer is using us for more reports, if there are more departments using us, right? We used to have 1 department, now there are 3. There's growth in their program. That growth indicates a trajectory which is likely to drive business outcome. And the actionable piece there is that I'm driving my team, the CSMs, to go after those elements, and we have very specific ones. Certain features, certain reports, certain capabilities, broadening in throughout the organization, things like that.
Got it. Thank you, Boaz. Thank you very much. Hey, Brian, are you streamlining this too?
Correct, yeah.
So, just FYI, if you're gonna speak, where is the camera?
It's over there, in the middle of the room.
Top hole.
Really?
You actually have some questions from
So,
our live viewers.
to the camera, if you're watching and it's live streaming, you want to post a question, Brian is actually sharing it right here. So Aaron Thompson, I'm sure he's not in this room, right?
No, he's online.
He's online. Hi, Aaron. We're going to address your question. What's the best practice volume? So what's the best practices for volume of health score inputs? That means how many metrics feed the overall health score, right? And one of you said 10? Who said 10? Approximately 10? Right, I'll do a poll in a second. And he says he heard as many as 40 to 45 used. I've never seen that, okay? And everything in between, thoughts on approximately sweet spot. So just we're gonna do a poll here and just see like in this room what there's like, I don't know, whatever. How many have less than 5 metrics feeding into the overall health score calculation? Or less, 5 or less, 1. How many has 10 to 5 to 10 metrics feeding into the overall health score? The majority, I would say. Okay, how many have more than 10? 10 to 20? More than 10? How many?
We have 20 today.
Jeez. Anybody beats 20? Okay, I just like wonder how the algorithm feeds into the overall score. And who else said they had more? He's smiling. Who else said they had more than 10? Don't be shy. Come on.
Why wouldn't you have more?
Well, I'm sort of wondering, is more better? Why is more better?
Why is less better?
Yeah, why?
Why is
I think it's it depends what matters to your business.
You need to do real math on more than 5 characters.
Yeah, how do you do
More than
math
5
on more than 5? Yeah,
If you've
exactly.
got
Like the
100
percentage.
more predictive analytics, take 10, 15. If you don't, like, I'd like to see
Alright.
math on someone doing more than 5.
It's important what you just said, so that the camera sees you too.
Oh, sorry. So my point was just because I've struggled with this.
Yes.
I used to be a researcher, and so, and I've worked with some predictive models. It's really hard to do the math on more than five factors, right? Because there's a lot of interactions, right? So it's not only, you know, I've got a 10, a 10, a 10, and a 1 on something. So because I've got a 1, oh boy, we're in problems, do something. Because a lot of times what it is if you have a 5 on something and an 8 on something else, that's a really big problem. And maybe a 2 on one factor doesn't really matter if everything else is 10. It's just, it becomes mathematically really complex. But the other thing I will note, like in this whole discussion, like you have to tell your people to do something, right? I mean, you have to give them some indicator. So as much as these scores aren't perfect, they do help people prioritize their time. And like, that's the game we play, right? It's limited resources and unlimited opportunity. Anyway.
True. Actually, well, tell us about your 20 and why do you think that's a better approach?
Sure,
Or
so-
just your approach?
So I've been accused multiple times in the past for having too many metrics for my people, for my customers, for whatever. The way I look at that is the world is complex, right? That's just reality. So if I put a mirror against it, I'm not doing anything bad. I'm just saying to you, the world is complex. So the way I look at it, as long as the impact in terms of the time it takes your people to gather the information is curtailed, you should do as many as you can. Now I understand the mathematical problem there, but most of us, I don't use unless outside the Comico piece, which does a mathematical assessment on our communications. All the other stuff is not mathematical, but it gives me great indicators, right? Red, yellow, green throughout a very large set of metrics that give me the right indication on the relationship side, on the usage side, on the technology side, on the support side. And because most of these I'm able to pick either from the tool itself or from Salesforce, the amount of manual input is fairly minimal. And as far as I'm concerned, if the manual requirement is minimal, I'd like as many data points as I can.
Okay, so do you then take all 20 and assign them weighted averages so that you can calculate an overall health score?
Not yet.
Got it. So that's why it works.
And the reason I don't do that is because it's
Right?
extremely complex to put in a formula. And what I found is that
There's 20.
what I find is it's easier to view, look throughout the page and say, okay, do I have too many reds? That's the problem. I don't know how to put it into a formula.
Yep.
I haven't found it.
Right,
that way.
it would be probably impossible with 20. But it's a very interesting, no, because if you do want to have 20, I think the only way you could do this is to say, well, when I squint my eyes, is it mostly red, mostly, right?
Or are there reds in certain columns that I know are indicators?
Right.
But this is where I don't have the formula, I just know. And I only have 850
And maybe that's really the approach, because what are we trying to do with this overall health score? What is the purpose?
Drive action, right?
Yeah.
Drive action. But it wouldn't you drive more specific action if you had 20.
Yeah, but wouldn't, there you go. Wouldn't a one formula for all 20 metrics assume that all your customers are the same? Whereas what Boris was talking about, if I saw 20 indicators, I could say, well, red for this customer doesn't really mean anything, but red for that customer does. So the human does the math, intuitively or
Better.
case by case.
Because they'll consider the stage, they'll consider a bunch of other things, and
It also depends on level of touch, right? How high
the
touch,
exact-
low touch, right?
let's not say
It's
touch,
different.
but yeah, enablement. Yes,
Does anybody share the health score cross-functional? Or
does
is it
anybody,
a
the question
CS
is,
metric? Or do you share with the customer as well outside?
right, so let's ask this. Does anybody share their customer health score with other teams within the organization? Which team? Where's the?
Everybody on Salesforce.
Everybody on Salesforce? Any specific teams that are looking at it?
The sales team.
The sales team, because they do the upsells and the cross-sells?
Product manager.
Product managers? They're looking at it, like you could see them like all the time?
Well, they're not looking at individual scores,
But
but they're looking at
overall,
aggregate
because it's
averages
based on
by
usage
segment,
and features and
different
stickiness,
verticals.
okay, because the way that your health score is actually
Yeah.
designed is very much feature-based and usage-based, so I could see why they'd be very gung-ho about that. Anybody else knows that there's another team that always looks at the customer health score? Talk about sales, product team, training, support in your organization? Yes, I have a client that also shares it with support, and they religiously look at it.
Executive team.
The executive team, that's right, they're very, very interested, right?
In our renewals team.
And the renewals team, which is fail.
Finance team, actually, like before they actually send out an invoice, they want to know, like typically.
Your finance team consistently looks at it
Not consistently, but like certain accounts.
when they don't pay. Yeah, it's an indicator, yeah.
It's a health indicator.
Oh, they don't pay. Let's take a look at the health score. There might be a connection here. And this email, if they're red, this email is softer if they're green. Right? I would do that. All right. The other question is, how many of you actually share the health score with your customers? How many of you have a strong feeling in your stomach when I ask that question? Like they jerk back, like no way in hell would I share the health score with my customer. No knee-jerk reaction? How many of you would share the health score with your customer?
Not the same, right?
Huh?
Not the exact same health indicator.
Not the exact same. When someone says that to me, that means to me that potentially when they design the health score, it's not customer centric. It's internal. Just I'll let you think about that. Okay. All right, it's 7:15, and we talked a lot about internal metrics and customer health to help us renew and expand value for us. And I want to invite a very special guest that flew in from Dallas to meet us all, including those on the camera. Do we have any other questions, Brian?
That's it.
That's it. Thank you, Aaron. So without further ado, you ready, Brian?
Hey, when you are.
All right, ready. Okay, maybe not. I'd like to welcome Lincoln for the
Do I have walkout
fireside
music?
chat. Here in
I guess it's not.
Hello.
It's on.
There you go, thank you.
Yes. Do you want to sit here or here? All right.
Hello. Hi.
Okay, so now, insofar we spoke about, internal metrics that we look at. I want to open the discussion and really think about how can we leverage customer data how do we sorry about that, man. Never mind. How do we leverage customer data to really drive outcomes, which is something that's really very hard to track using data, right?
I
So-
can lift it for you over there. I can. There you go.
Do you want to switch?
Pay no attention.
I make my guests work.
Right. Where's the curtain?
I feel like I got the power. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of a fireside chat, and I'm going to throw in some questions for Lincoln, and I'd like to also have you take a stab at it, so you're not completely veggie out by the end of this discussion. So one of the things I was going to ask Lincoln is, what are the 2 goals of customer success? And so does anyone want to take a stab at it and kind of share their self-belief in what are the 2 goals for customer success? Yeah? You want to take a stab at it?
We just built our customer success vision and mission, and it has 2 goals. So one is to build a customer-centric culture throughout the company, and the second is to provide value to our customers through our products.
Awesome. Anybody else wants to share? Yeah.
Hi. I think customer success goals are making sure your new customers are happy from the beginning. And secondly, they're happy for a long, long time and keep paying you.
Yes, keep paying.
I'm a real bottom line person, so that's what is important to me for my customers.
Awesome. Lincoln, what's your perspective? You write a lot of blogs about customer success, and hopefully everybody at least read one of your blogs, and if not, I highly recommend it.
That was the requirement to get in.
Right? Did
One
anybody
blog.
not pass because the door's shut?
Yeah. Don't let it hit you.
Nice.
Okay, so for me, customer success there's 2 goals. One is to make sure the customer is successful.
Successful.
Make sure they achieve their desired outcome. That's number 1. Number 2 is make sure that if they don't blame you. So what I mean by that is we need to set up our customers with everything we can to make them successful, but there are things that are outside the scope of our relationship with the customer. But those things still have to happen for the customer to actually get value out of your product or out of your service or whatever it is that you are selling to them. So I may have all the features and functionality required, and a customer could go through all the required steps, functionally complete their use of the product, and still come out the other end not having achieved their desired outcome. So think about, the example I always give is like email marketing software. I can build a list, I can upload a list, I can write an email, I can send that email, and it looks like I'm doing what I need to do. But if nobody reads those emails, or everybody unsubscribes, or nobody clicks the link, nobody comes to my event, I'm not actually successful. And I'm probably not going to take the blame for that. I'm going to think your product sucks, and I'm going to go switch to your competitor. And what we want to do is, in situations like that, I want to set everything up as much as I can to make the customer successful, guide them through that process, do whatever it takes. But I also want to let them know that there's a lot that they have to do to be successful. They have to know how to write a good email, using that example. They have to know how to write a headline. Maybe I can start to build some stuff into the product, use AI and machine learning, and try to come up with suggestions for them. But they have to know what they're doing to a certain extent. Otherwise, they're not going to get the value that they want out of that product. So I want, my main goal is to make sure that every single customer gets exactly what they need out of their relationship with our company. But secondarily, I want to make sure that if they don't, they just don't blame us. And that's not just being funny or kind of saying, trying to offload the blame. It's actually really good. If the customer doesn't blame us, then they're not going to churn. They might actually say, you know what, you're right, it wasn't us. I'm sorry, it wasn't the vendor, it wasn't you, it was us. It was on us as the customer. So maybe next quarter we'll actually try. Maybe this coming quarter we'll actually put in the effort that's necessary to be successful. So it's about setting them up for success. And if they don't take the right action, well, at least they know that it was on them, they didn't take the action.
Sounds like you're promoting customer accountability and educating them on what it really takes in order to be successful with your system. And how many of us have seen customers that don't have the framework in place from a business standpoint, and they think that if they buy your system, now everything is going to work. This is how they're gonna get better at support, get better at sales, get better at marketing. Whereas in fact, we know that there's a lot of things that they need to change in their own organization. And I think what you're hearing you say is that customer success managers have the responsibility to educate the client around what does it really take to be successful. Yes, question, comment.
Nobody likes it when I say this, especially people in sales. I think it's the responsibility of sales to have that conversation, to make sure that the fit is appropriate, because what happens if the CUSM, now the customer's bought the product, the salesperson never said any of this stuff, now the CSM is telling them all this stuff, and they're thinking, why the hell didn't the sales guy tell me this stuff? Because now I have way more work to do than I thought I did.
Yeah.
I would disagree. I would say it was the customer success organization's responsibility to have a checkpoint in place during the sales process to see if it is a good fit, so it never comes downstream to them in the first place. Because the salesperson's job is going to try to sell, and that's new people, old people, whatever the case may be, they're under pressure, they're going to try to sell. So as a mature customer success organization, put that checkpoint process in place, because you're the one that's going to suffer from it. So
But here's the rub, and that's why I prefaced my statement with salespeople don't want to hear this. You do anything to slow the sales guy's sales cycle. If a CUSM comes in and starts having this readiness conversation with the customer, and it slows the sales cycle, the salesperson is not going to like that.
This is a discussion and a function between the executive team, not the CSMs and the salespeople.
Sure.
Well, we're going to assume that, just for the sake of the assumption that what Lincoln just said is applicable also for the ideal customer, not just the wrong customer. So even if the ideal customer walks into the door, the CSM's responsibility is to ensure that the client knows what is their accountability, or what is the roadmap and the changes that they need to make in their own organization to be successful with the system, regardless whether the customer is ideal or wrong for you. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so we have to get really clear. I mean, just take a step back. You got to get clear on what a bad fit customer looks like. And if you look on 16ventures.com, I have something about success potential. There's 6 different inputs into figuring that out. You got to get clear on that. We can't solve upstream problems downstream, so we can't be trying to make bad fit customers successful. It just doesn't work. It wastes time. If you're dealing with that right now, figure out what success potential looks like. Start to quantify that by actually keeping track of your time, the time spent dealing with customers that you would identify as bad fit. You can look at churn customers. How many of those were bad fit? You can go look at your existing sales pipeline or anything that's coming in from marketing and see how many of those are a bad fit. Look at your existing customers, how many of those are a bad fit. You can start to get a pretty good idea what's going to happen in the future. This is not actually, I agree with both of you guys. This needs to be built into the sales process. We can start teeing these things up. There's a concept that I use that I call orchestration, and it's probably one of the most important things that you could do. Really comes down to managing expectations. And honestly, if we just did that better in our own lives, not just with our customers, things would probably be better. Like if we managed expectations with our family or whatever. But if you do that with your customers, and this doesn't take technology, it doesn't take any magical AI or programming or whatever, just start letting your customers know this is what's going to happen down the road. So a salesperson can start to lay that out. Hey, are you going to be the person that implements this? No? Okay, cool. Why don't you connect me with that person? I'll get our CSM involved now. Sometimes, and we see this, I don't have empirical evidence on this, but in my experience, you get a CSM involved earlier during the sales cycle in some way. Sales cycles often have a tendency to be a little bit shorter. That makes salespeople happy. No salesperson is going to say, oh, hey, no, don't get involved. I don't want my sales to close faster. Like, that's not going to work. That's never going to happen. So if you can come in and say something that's meaningful to them, and then you can deliver on that, now they trust you. So if you go to sales, sales organization and say, look, let us vet your pipeline, not to try to keep you from closing sales, but to see where we might be able to help you. We can look in there and we can see some characteristics about those customers and we can provide some guidance. Maybe, hey, ask them this question, use this language, set up a meeting with us and them if it makes sense financially for that type of customer. So there's a lot you can do. And then, the reality is this though, even in the B2B world, people, especially maybe in a B2B world, people buy based on emotion still. And then they look for logic to sort of justify that purchase. So we tend to forget that, and we think everything that they heard during the sales process, they're going to remember when they become a customer, and that's like not true at all. So, we have a huge opportunity to either pick up the ball and run with it or completely drop it right after the customer becomes a customer. It's a moment I call the WTF moment. It's when the customer can, either go, oh, this was the best decision I've ever made. The political and social capital I invested in this internally in the company was investment that's going to get a great ROI, or they can be like, what the fuck just happened? And we don't want our customers to do that, right? So, that guy does for whatever fucking reason. So we want to make sure that we, as the customer is going through the sales process, that we just pick it up and run with it once they become that customer. And so anything we can do along the way to reduce friction, to set them up, to orchestrate what's going to happen after they become a customer is great. The other thing to remember is the more complex the customer, the more they have a change management issue on their end. And if you can start to bring things up during the sales cycle, even if it's a salesperson just kind of bringing in a customer success person who really only does sales stuff, but they sort of still sit under customer success. CSMs can ask questions that salespeople can't. They're going to get answers that salespeople won't get, and they can go in and it's a presumptive close. Like, this is what we're going to do. Salespeople can try to use that language, but it's a little off-putting. It's like, whoa, I didn't agree to anything. CSM comes in and says, this is what the first 30, 60, 90 days look like. Boom, done. All right, cool. Now I can go back and start planning. It's no surprises. If we don't tell people things, they start to use their imagination, right? And that's a really bad deal.
Have you seen this implemented?
No, I just made all this up.
So,
how often is this implemented?
It's implemented as often as I get the opportunity to implement it. So I'm not an analyst. I don't have empirical evidence across a huge swath of companies outside of those that I work with. So in the companies where we do this stuff, it tends to have really great results. The sales cycles tend to get shorter. Churn tends to go down. It's hard. That's the goal. But it tends to have positive results. I guess the better way to say, I've never seen it where it has anything but a positive impact.
I agree.
I would love to see like a really big empirical study on this, but I don't know of one.
The only negative impact I've ever seen, and it's actually positive, is that sometimes your business will go down if you don't have a good product market fit. And so that's a different problem. There's some baseline stuff we have to have in place here, right? So I'm making some assumptions that you have a good product that people actually want to buy. So that's a good point though. If you start trying to go through the process of nailing down who your ideal customer is and getting deliberate in your growth and all that stuff, you might find that at some point you actually don't have it right. So that's possible, definitely.
So may I ask you, what is your definition of customer success given these goals and all these different feedback?
So the definition that I've landed on at this point, and it's evolved over the years, but I've had this one for a little while, is the customer success is when your customers achieve their desired outcome through their interactions with your company. Now, don't overthink that concept. And if you tell people that concept, remind them not to overthink it. It's very simple. The implementation of it, the actually doing it, it's a whole different story. But the concept is relatively simple. Now, there's a couple things in there that we need to unpack. One is through the interactions with your company, and that's really critical. I said this for maybe a couple weeks, then I caught myself. I said it's through the use of your product. And I was like, oh, actually, that's not true at all. It's through all of the interactions across the entire life cycle. And that's really important to remember. It's from the first interactions with marketing and sales through any sort of pre-sales work, through onboarding, through procurement, how they buy, through onboarding.
The entire customer journey.
Said a simpler way, yes. I was gonna go on, but okay. Yeah, no, across the entire journey. And so, the vast majority of their interactions with you may be through the product, but there are other things going on. And we need to just take all of those things into consideration. Probably there are gonna be certain phases of the life cycle where there's more in-depth interaction, onboarding, tends to be the main focus. But across the life cycle, there's going to be times where they're going to have deeper interactions with you, and you need to really keep those things in mind. The other thing is desired outcome, and this is again my definition. Desired outcome is made up of two pieces, and that's required outcome and appropriate experience. And it's just what your customer needs to achieve. It's their business outcome. It's the thing that they have to have. If you don't even solve for that, like, you're not in the game. Most tech companies, I think, at least start out, certainly, but a lot still do focus on only that. And so you say, I have all the functionality, we have all the features, we have feature parity with our competitors, whatever. Why are our customers leaving? So that's required outcome, and then you have appropriate experience. So that's what your customers and how they need to achieve it. So the goal, the required outcome, appropriate experience is how they need to achieve it. And you need both of those things if you want your customers to, and here's a bad word when it comes to, it's the F word, when it comes to data-driven people. Your customers need to feel successful. But feel.
I was expecting something else.
No, I already said fuck. Feel.
We are live streaming. I'll have so many edits.
Feel is a word that people don't like. I want to be all data driven. But feel is something that's quantifiable. I can check boxes and I can say, I didn't have this, I didn't have this, I didn't have this, so I didn't feel successful. So it really comes down to the experience side of things. And so the difference between a customer that is so there's two types of loyalty, right? So a customer that's loyal to you because you're just the product they're using right now. The example we always give is there's a store right by your house. Probably everybody has this experience. There's a store right by your house that you go to because it's right by your house. You don't really like it. It's just convenient. It's just where you go. When you really want to buy something cool, you go, you go across town to Whole Foods or something. But you go to this little stupid store. But what if a store opened up across the street or an equally convenient area that was better? You'd go there, right? We don't want to be that to our customers because it's very easy for them to, at some point, make the switch. We want to be something like the example I just gave, Whole Foods. Now, I don't know how that's being affected by being acquired by Amazon, but there was a time, kids, there was a time when Whole Foods had, fans, and people really talked about it in a special way, a lot more than just a grocery store. And so you would make it a destination. You would go there, you were loyal to it because of something, and that something was the experience. Even if you were going there to literally buy the same thing that you could get at that little store by your house.
I think it was like what they represented, the health, our pursuit for health.
Yeah, it's a positioning thing.
Positioning.
Yeah. So we want our customers to be that. I'll tell you just a quick little story on that. I was doing a workshop in Austin a couple weeks ago, and we were all standing around afterwards, and we had our phones out. Everybody had an iPhone, and I don't think anybody had the newest one. And they were like, somebody said, "Hey, would any of you ever consider getting an Android?" And I said, "Yeah, maybe." And I'm like, "Whoa, that's crazy," because I was like an Apple fanboy. Like I had everything to do with Apple. And just some things that have happened lately have kind of hurt the experience for me. Maybe functionality-wise, it's still there, but like just certain things. And I'm at a point where I'm kind of locked in to their ecosystem, and that's what's keeping me. But if enough bad stuff happens, like maybe I make that switch. And that's just a really interesting thing. So, just because you're able to, get your customers to be attitudinally loyal to you because you provide both the required outcome and the appropriate experience, don't think you can just rest on that. Either their experience might, or their appropriate experience might change, or you might let something slip, and then all of a sudden, it's not the appropriate experience anymore. And now they're thinking, yeah, you know what? There's other stuff out there that we could be going after. So, just that was like a kind of an eye-opening question for me. I was like, wow.
Well, you talk about desired outcomes and you talk about appropriate experience. Can you talk a little bit about how do you define desired outcome, and also if you can expand a little bit, when you work with your clients, how do you help them think through how to measure whether or not they have achieved or proven the value or achieved the desired outcome, and also the appropriate experience? How do you know that you have provided the appropriate, can you measure that?
Yeah, so when it comes to required outcome, we need to remember that's what we're focused on, is the actual outcome for the customer. So I was listening to all the discussion earlier, and there was a lot of discussion around measuring outcomes that had nothing to do with actually measuring outcomes. It was all about the use of the product to some degree. And to me, that's not surprising, but that's not what we're actually, somebody doesn't buy your product to use it. Sorry. They buy it, or they subscribe to it, or whatever it is, whether it's your product or your service, they do business with you to get an outcome. And if you don't deliver that outcome at some point, very quickly, probably, they're going to start seeing that there's something not working here. So you have to understand what is required for them to actually get value. So the number one input into customer health, I call it success vector. I want to look at something that's a little bit more forward-looking. Customer health tends to be just kind of a point in time. So I want something that says, what's the likelihood that a customer is going to stay or not stay, or if they do stay, they're going to grow. And the number one input into that, or just any other measure, I don't care, needs to be, is the customer doing what's necessary to get value? That's it. Of course.
Is the customer?
Is the customer doing, or is the customer, are the things that are, that's a good point. Are the things that are necessary to get value being done? So we have I have this concept called joint accountability, which is what you said earlier about customer accountability. This is not a one-sided thing. I mean, there's things that I might need to do for my client, some things that the client needs to do. We both do those things, they're going to get value. If they don't, if one of us fails, well, that's going to be a problem. And so, I tell CSMs to basically say that with their customer, lay that out there. This is what you need to do, and this is what we need to do. And if there's others internally in our company as the vendor that are working on things for you, as your CSM, I'm going to be checking in on that. I'm going to make sure I'm going to be advocating for you here internally. And if anything goes off the rails internally here, I'm going to jump in and intervene, just like I will intervene with you when I see you not doing what's necessary for you to reach the goal that you just told me that you need to reach. So it's important that we understand what they need to do and are they doing it. But what's interesting is that's usually two things. One, that's usually not being measured. We don't really even know what those things are. And two, that's usually something I get a lot of pushback on. Oh, that's hard. I don't know how to do that. Cool, let's figure that out. And it is hard.
To define the outcomes or define
to figure out what they need to do. Yeah, I mean, it's not hard. It's a process we have to go through. But a lot of times it's almost a non-starter. I don't even want to talk about that. Let's talk about processes. Let's talk about data. What processes are you doing? If you have processes in place and you don't know what it takes for your customer to be successful, what processes do you have in place? I don't know what you're doing. You're doing something. You're working really hard at it, but it's not really customer success. But here's the thing about, and we kind of need to know where we come from, I think. A lot of customer success comes from account management. And so traditional account management was like, here's a book of business. You, CSM, get $2 million in ARR across this many customers, there you go. Make sure they pay their bill, make sure that they renew, and if you can, make sure they buy more. Cool, go after it. That worked in a world where you didn't have to actually make the customer successful. You didn't have to actually try to get them to do things. That model doesn't really work when you add in the piece about actually making your customer successful. So we need to understand what it takes for them to be successful and operationalize around that, which quickly goes to something that came up earlier. Is like, well, I don't know who said it, but we're kind of looking at it like all of our customers are the same. Well, right. As soon as you start getting into this process of like, what do our customers need to do to be successful, you realize they don't all need to do the same things. Well, right. So they're not all the same. We need to look at it that way, which is where appropriate experience really comes in. If we have customers that sort of all share the same required outcome, the differentiator between those, or what you would segment based on, should probably be their appropriate experience, because that's also going to tell you what kind of coverage you need to give them. You don't need to have the same level of coverage for one customer, that requires one-on-one meetings, QBRs. You need to fly out and take them to a steak dinner, and another type of customers, everything is self-service. If you don't understand that, you're going to probably over-optimize or over-deliver for some customers. And that's what you see a lot of. You see customer success organizations that start out with that account management way of looking at it. A couple of years later, they've thrown bodies at as a solution, and they hit some point where they can't scale, or it's just costing too much to scale or whatever. And it's because or churn goes up, and they're like, I don't understand. We're giving everybody a lot of coverage, a lot of human interaction, but they don't understand what their customers actually need to be successful. So number one, figure that out. Number two, are they doing those things, or are those things being done?
Okay, so I want to take a step back and just talk about the definition of business outcomes or desired outcomes. Can you give the audience an example of a really good example of a desired outcome being defined with a client, and maybe like one that does not qualify?
Well, I mean,
or a bad one.
Yeah, a desired outcome.
Just thinking maybe of a client that you worked with, and they came up with this desired outcome, and you're thinking, no, that's not a desired outcome.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's inward looking. If it's not about your customer, it's not their desired outcome. And so anything that has to do with your product, using your product, anything that isn't about their business, you're probably looking at it the wrong way.
So if they say their business outcome is to deploy the software across the organization, that's not a desired outcome.
No, and that's the thing. If we ask our customer, hey, what's your desired outcome with our software? Oh, I want to make sure that we have all 100 licenses, up and running in the next 90 days. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
But why did you actually buy it? And the thing is, if I'm talking to the administrator, that might actually be their desired outcome.
Right.
So we might have a situation where we have customers that are very large, that have different personas in the company. So yeah, individual personas may have those individual goals, but
an executive, can you give an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, I want more revenue. I want more people to my events. I want just stuff like that.
Yeah, in my experience, is either you help them increase revenue or you help them decrease cost. Just overly simplified, of course. Does anybody object to that or think about something else?
What else is there?
Yeah, it depends.
Avoid risk. Very good, which is saving money.
Yeah, there's nothing else.
On legal fees.
Reduce costs or increase revenue.
Yes, I agree with you, actually. I'm being facetious.
Yes, to all of that, except I would say you need to make sure, this is why if you're selling a sort of horizontal product and you sell into healthcare and you sell into something else that isn't healthcare, cybersecurity, you're probably going to talk about that cost saving in a different way, right? And so that's why at the very least we need to understand that our customers are different, and we need to understand if they have certain customer segments that have, we're just talking about domain-specific language earlier, things that really resonate with certain customers. You might find, this is not necessarily not going to make me popular here, but there are times where The best course of action is not going out and finding people with customer success experience, but actually finding people with domain experience and teaching them customer success best practices. Because you can teach that stuff, you can't teach experience, and sometimes, depending upon the customer segment, that experience is more important than anything else. So.
Okay, so I just want to remind anybody that's like in live streaming, if you post questions, we will try to address them at the end of the presentation here, the keynote. If it is relevant to this discussion, which is about measuring outcomes, then I might pop them in earlier, but if they are related to some other topic, we'll just park it at the end. And so, we talk about desired outcome. Let's suppose we already defined them with the client. What are the key requirements to actually measuring outcomes?
So, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the number one thing is, are the customers and are we doing the things that are necessary to be successful? Because so some of the things that were brought up, I don't think anything that was brought up earlier was wrong. I just think if we're looking at, some of the standard inputs of, trouble tickets, and are they being resolved, and are they paying their bills, and all this other stuff. That's cool, that's good, but none of that actually matters unless they're successful. Well, maybe they're paying the bills. But if they're not getting out of it what they need, this is a problem. One of the things that I see a lot of, especially with SaaS companies, is an over-reliance on usage data. And just this idea that activity is meaningful. So going back to that, really simple email marketing idea of, they did these 3 or 4 things, and that should indicate that they were able to send an email, and that's cool. They did what they needed to do. But the reality is there was a reason they signed up. So to the extent possible, I would love for you to be able to figure out, and you can do this. This can be inferred through the actions that your customers take, especially as they sign up. You can figure out what their initial sort of use case was. If you're in a higher touch situation, you can actually ask what their goals are, and then know what do they need to do to reach the outcome associated with that goal. So if a customer tells me that they need to increase revenue by 20%, all right, cool. That may be different than a customer that's using the same product but needs to just be in compliance. I don't know if the same product would do both those things, but they're 2 different ways of moving forward. So a company I'm working with right now is in the real estate world, and a very simple way of looking at things with them is we came up with new agents switching from, new agents, are they older, experienced agents? Yeah, so many uhs and stuff.
I was referring to the older comment.
Well, since we're editing, fuck. So, are they new agents? Are they existing agents with, switching from another product? Are they existing agents using this type of product for the first time? Each of those types of customers are going to require something different. And then there's another input is what's their initial goal. So right there, you have several different ways that you would work with the customer when they first become a customer. And that's so simple. That didn't take a lot of analysis. That just took, they already knew their customers. Those were some simple ideas that they just pulled out. You could do that right now. That doesn't require a lot of excess work. So anyway, I feel like I'm boring you.
No. Actually,
this stuff
it's really
is like
interesting.
Amazing, transformative.
I think we got to the point where we know what kind of outcomes we're looking to define with our clients. We have a good sense about what kind of quantitative goals we can set up with them. But I think where the missing link for me is, Lincoln, is how do you track and measure towards that goal? Because it's one thing to say, hey, we'll increase your revenue by 20%, but it's another thing to actually say, hey, we've increased it by 10% in the last 6 months, so we're halfway through achieving that goal. How do you measure that if the data is not in your system? What do you recommend typically?
To use your imagination.
How do you prove value?
Yeah, so first of all, I have to know what it is, and then, I don't know how to explain that, because it seems so straightforward.
Well, I'll give
thank you for the fucking,
more edits.
What the fuck are those Crickets.
No.
Oh,
Crickets are
man.
good. They're very soothing.
Yes, they're soothing. Dude, seriously.
She's not
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. So what if the desired, what if the measured outcome?
So is this,
What if
it's just
the,
these are not
like,
categorized.
desired measured outcome is something that they
They
consider
always
a
change
product?
out.
Like something about future products, revenues, because I've run into that, like, right, like, as I think about outcomes as two things. One, you have to achieve them, and two, you have to get them to recognize it, right? You can be crushing it, and if the right people don't know, it doesn't matter. But I've run into the situation where the desired outcomes, increases in revenue, market share, how quickly they bring products to market, they don't want to share.
They don't want to share that, okay.
Yeah, it's like
Okay, cool.
private information.
So I may not be able to get what I would want to, so that's interesting. In that situation, I would probably still, I don't need to know details. I just need, yeah, I mean, in that situation, I might just ask them, yeah, are you guys, have you done, I might even be able to see, it looks like you guys have created, you've done these different projects. We don't know what those are, but I just want to make sure that those are, you're feeling confident, going forward. So that's, that's an awesome example. Yeah, do they feel?
I've baselined and just tell you, like, are you moving off the baseline? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you expect to improve by 20%, I don't care what the numbers are.
Right.
I'm always looking for different ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know what your, to the extent possible, I want to know as specifically as possible what your goal is. But yeah, I mean, if you tell me you guys have an internal goal and you tell me that you met it, the only thing I can do is take your word for it at that point. I'm going to try my best to look at other data points to maybe quantify that. But, I mean, that's an awesome example of probably an atypical use case. I mean, I think a lot of people aren't so protective of certain things, especially in systems that they trust. But this is another key point, just to understand where you fit in your customer's universe. So going to the other, or how do we know this? How do we figure out what this stuff is? We need to it's really, well, obviously you need to know your customer better than they know themselves. So you need to spend time with your customers. How many people in here have spent time with your customers in the last 6 months, not showing them your product, not even asking them questions, just observing them? So you or somebody from your company, and not through a screen.
It's about 30% raised their hands before, and now I see about,
I don't know, 25%. That's
25%.
good. That's awesome. That's very cool. That's pretty rare, actually. So for the rest of you,
I think they've been reading your blogs a lot.
no, but really what you want to do is make sure that it's your job to know your customers better than they know themselves. And so I want to spend time with customers. I want to observe. I want to understand that when a customer first becomes a customer, I might not be at the center of their universe, and that's okay. So going back to sort of orchestration, setting things up, letting them know where what they need to do, recognizing that I'm not going to drop everything on them on day one. I might start, kind of say, again, here's what the first 90 days look like, and kind of feed them the right things. Something else that came up earlier was I heard a lot of time-based things, and I couldn't tell if a couple people who said this were being kind of sarcastic or not. But after 30 days, somebody's on board. We take an action. I will tell you. I mean, I've gone into situations where that's actually exactly what's going on. At 30 days, we mark them on board, and now they're on to the next phase. That's not true. I mean, that's bad. So we need to understand these, what I call success milestones. So understanding where the customer is going, what they need to do to be successful, and along the way, what are the things, sort of the milestones that matter. And those, they're not time-based. They're not, a customer's been with us for 90 days. One of the things that I see a lot is, people will say, but that seems, they'll have a reason for it. 90 days, that's logical. Yeah, to you, I mean, it sounds like a nice number, but it means nothing to the customer, right? One thing I would tell you guys to do also, so 90 days isn't really that, it doesn't really apply here, but also, just bigger picture, is decouple success from a contract. So, if you sign a 1-year contract, that's great, congratulations. Has nothing to do with their success. And it has really nothing to do with their renewal. I mean, you have some timing there based around that renewal. But, you know, so to your point, you know, if they're 6 months in and they've only met half their goal, or they haven't even gotten value yet, but they're taking a little bit longer, we need to be transparent with them. We need to let them know you're 6 months away from a renewal. But based on your current trajectory, you know, you're 8 months away from really getting value, whatever that value is. So that means we need to start letting everybody know that when renewal time comes, we need to let that happen because you're on the right track to getting value. But a lot of people hide from those conversations. And so, again, just really laying out everything that has to happen with the customer on their side, on our side, who's responsible, lay all that out, and then you can start operationalizing around that. And that observing your customers, looking to adjacent products to figure out, and adjacent products to you. So, or
products that you would integrate with, or other
no, actually,
products that you
I would
sell?
say, maybe I'm saying
When you
wrong.
say adjacent, what do
Yeah,
you mean?
products that are being sold into the same part of the company around the same price point.
From you or from your
From other
the market?
from other vendors, not necessarily competitors,
Okay.
because they're probably not going to use you and
Me.
somebody else, but they're going to use other products that are maybe similar price, sold into the same part of the organization. If you sell a point solution, don't go compare yourself to a mission critical ERP or something like that. But you want to know based on that. If you look at that, you're going to know sort of what their expectations are in working with vendors like that, and then you can start asking them questions like, your customer uses this other product. So, well, what don't you like about that company? They're not a competitor. There's nothing competitive there, so they shouldn't feel weird telling you these things. And you say, well, what do you like, or what don't you like? And you'll start understanding more about what the experience is that they would prefer. And so if they say, well, this other vendor doesn't spend any time with us, everything's self-service. So they might have an expectation, or what their appropriate experience would be, a little bit higher touch. And then you have to make the decision, well, they don't pay us very much. We can't give them a higher touch experience. And what that means is they're a bad fit customer. We shouldn't be doing business with them. What most companies would do is just say, well, we'll give them the same crappy experience that the other vendor does. And then they wonder why there's a lot of churn in that particular customer segment. So, we have to really understand, the entire customer life cycle to the best of your ability, but that requires you first getting really clear on the customer segments, which ideally should be based on what their appropriate experience is. And it's not easy. I mean, it's a process, but it requires work.
I'm trying to think about the adjacent products that I think it's a really smart comment. One of the things that I'm thinking about is, could the client expectations around appropriate experience for them be fused by how, the type of experience that they're getting from the adjacent products in the market, setting up the bar for you? And that is why it is important for you as a vendor or as a solution that plays in that ecosystem, if you will, to understand what type of experience their customers might expect, so that you can be proactive about the type of engagement model you give them and prevent churn proactively.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So, you can actually reach out to the customers of those other products. If your customers use those products, you can talk to them about it. You can reach out to customers of those other products. A lot of companies like to put their customers right there on their website, so you can go reach out. You might have a third party do it if you don't want anybody to know what you're doing, but it's really interesting when you start digging in, and you might find though that, this is what's going on in the market, but nobody likes it. And so nobody feels successful. So you get to come in and actually do something different, do what's right. And at the very least,
leverage, so not only inquire about products that are not your competitors, but you can actually find out what is the experience that your competitors give, and give one up if you're looking for that competitive advantage to provide to your clients in terms of the appropriate experience and maybe a better experience.
Yeah, I mean, you could also go look at review sites and stuff like that of your competitors and see what they're saying. Look at what they say about you. I mean, try to look objectively at that. There's something I call latent AX. So I say AX for appropriate experience. And there's this idea of latent AX, which was which is something that a lot of vendors have been able to tap into knowingly or unknowingly. So you look at something like Airbnb, there was a latent AX out there that was like the appropriate experience for people was not corporate hotels, but there wasn't really another option. And so Airbnb said, you know, we think there's something there, and they tried some stuff and it worked. And they sort of unlocked this latent appropriate experience. And you see that with lots of different vendors in lots of different areas. Tesla, you know, is like kind of redefining what a car is. So there's lots of opportunity there to make that not just your competitive advantage, but you know, the whole reason you exist in the market as being like, we're coming in with the appropriate experience for this particular market segment. And if it's like Airbnb or even Tesla, you know, it's a small segment at first, but then that starts to spread. People say, you know what, I just had a great experience with this. I stayed in a really cool apartment in downtown San Francisco. I got out of the really crappy hotels. Like, okay, cool, that's awesome. They start spreading the word around that, and now you start to build momentum. So there's always a possibility that you could find something like that.
So tell me, what is the most important thing to measure to ensure that you're driving customers towards business outcomes?
I think I've already said it like a million times, but
What was your question?
No. I gave her the questions ahead of time, guys. And then I can't even remember what the answers are.
And then he complains.
Just trying to make it seem authentic. No, so you know, it's are the things that need to be happening? You know, are the customers doing what they need to be doing? Are we doing what we need to be doing? Are the joint accountabilities being held up? If you're not measuring that, I mean, you're measuring something, that's great, but you know, this is why you see things like NPS. You know, companies have really high NPS and a lot of churn. Okay, cool. Why? Well, that doesn't actually measure anything to do with what's actually going on. It's NPS. If I'm going to weight it in any way, I mean, that's, to me, that's on the appropriate experience side of things. And you can actually have fans that aren't customers, right? I mean, I love that vendor. I'm not a customer. Well, I mean, that's cool, but ultimately we're talking about customers here. And, you know, unless we're a big consumer brand, we probably want most of those fans to actually be doing business with us. So you got to make sure that, I don't know, just make sure that are the things that need to be happening. And then the other stuff you can start bringing in. So, I mean, we were talking about how many data points do you need. Again, I don't think I heard anything that was wrong earlier. I think that's, I do think that trying to boil it down to some sort of scores, maybe just trying to optimize for the wrong thing in a lot of cases. But I don't know of a particular number that matters. All I know is that if it's not based on what's actually going on with the customer, then it doesn't matter.
You're talking about an inside view versus an outside?
Yeah. Yeah, an inside view of what's going on with the customer, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to open it up for questions, either from the live stream or here. Yes, Joe, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, wouldn't the most important metric for measuring outcomes is whatever metric the customer is going to use to determine whether they achieve the outcome or not?
Yeah, ultimately, but we do want to try to get ahead of these things, right? So if I know what your goal is, and we say that in 6 months you're going to reach that goal, cool. Do I wait till 6 months and ask you? You know, no. We try to figure out what they need to do to get there. So figure out what their goal is and kind of reverse engineer the process to get there. But yeah, I mean, that's ultimately all that matters is, are they getting what they need to get?
Yeah, like I told you, we're trying to track and measure outcomes right now, and so we look at two types of outcomes: the C-level outcome. Sorry, I thought my voice might be loud. So we look at two types of outcomes: the C-level outcome that we all talked about, revenue, increasing revenue, reducing costs, mitigating risk. But then there's operational outcomes, because a customer of ours is going to buy one of our security solutions because they want to identify and remediate malware as quickly as possible. That's what the executives want. The guy that's got to implement that technology has a whole different set of outcomes that he or she wants to achieve in accomplishing that. So ultimately, the KPIs that we measure have to determine, are these operational outcomes being met? And ultimately, did the corporate outcome get met?
Right. Ideally, one should be leading to the other, right?
Yes.
And that's where I go back to, in rather complex setups, you probably will have multiple personas that each have their own desired outcome. We need to know what those are. And you may have personas that have nothing to do with the actual product. I mean, maybe we need to report to finance every 6 months. Maybe there's just other people involved in, that need to know things that we need to provide some sort of visibility for. So it's critical, again, that we know. When I say we need to know our customers better than they know themselves, I mean, there are situations where we might say, hey, by the way, best practice is to bring in this team also and provide a facility to make that actually work.
How often do you advise the audience to revisit what are their business desired outcomes? Every year, or once you've accomplished the original ones? What if the client had been with you for 5 years and you've never asked them about the business outcomes? Would you still have that conversation?
When I start working with a client, we do two things. We kind of figure out what we need to do going forward and draw that line in the sand and say this is what the experience is going to be for customers going forward. And then we look at existing customers and figure out, we might end up actually segmenting those existing customers. Somebody that was with us 5 years and is doing fine, we may go ahead and just let them be fine. But we're probably going to come up with different cohorts within that existing customer base. Some that came on when we had no onboarding, some that never told us their goals. We're going to have to address that appropriately. It's not, a lot of people have hidden from their customers for a long time, and then they want to start doing customer success, and it's like, okay, we have to kind of tread lightly here, not because we're going to cause a bunch of customers to realize they're paying us and go churn, but we just need to approach them appropriately. So existing customers are one thing, but we can say going forward, any new customers that come in, this is the experience that they're going to get. We're going to manage expectations properly from the beginning. We're going to get their goal. And how often we need to realign with them depends on what it is. We do everything. It's probably, we do some monthly, some quarterly. I don't think where we talk about that kind of thing, I don't think we've ever done anything more than, you've ever gone more than a year. You would definitely want to realign.
After a year.
Yeah, but
I think that's actually absolutely probably true, is because most companies once a year realign as to what is their strategy for the year, or what is the company's goals for the year. And year over year, the company's situation might change. One year they could be in high growth. The other year they're stabilizing, so they're very focused on costs. And a CEO would do that. And that ultimately might change your executive sponsor's way of thinking and priority year over year, specifically at the beginning of the year, their fiscal year. So that's always a great time to just double click and check whether their business outcomes or desired business outcomes have changed. It could be that they never change. It's just more of it.
I think the other thing that I've run into that's relevant here is, if you're upselling and cross-selling, your business outcomes ideally are changing, right? So, I think to me that's a customer success job, looking at what else you can do. So I've achieved this business outcome in 6 months. What's the next thing we can do for you, and how are we going to measure that outcome? It can be the same, but it can be really different.
Well, I think, so we need to, going back to knowing our customers better than they know themselves, I need to be at least thinking about, if I don't know this already, what is the most logical next step? Once they achieve a particular milestone, where they need to go. And so whether that's through expansion, or whether that's just, the most logical use of the product that they already bought, you're right. And I sometimes somebody will say to me, our customers churn out after a year. I don't get it. Some of you probably heard me say this before. I don't get it. Why does that happen? Nothing changed. Well, right, with you, but your customer changed. And in fact, your value prop, the whole thing, the whole reason they did business with you, the thing that you sold them on was that they would change, that they would grow, that they would whatever, evolve. And then you're shocked when they do. Right? And so we need to take that into consideration. So I always say customer success management, is my definition, is it's the process of moving the customer to their ever evolving desired outcome. Just kind of trying to keep that top of mind, that our customers are not stagnant, and we need to keep that in mind.
Okay, I'll allow a couple more questions. We did get some questions from the live stream, and I want to ask Brian, would it be possible to type in the answers?
Yes.
Instead of addressing them live, so
Yes.
just to be respectful of the time. Yes.
No, I was just
Comment?
commenting on, to some extent, how often you do this, checking in with a customer depends on the type of business you are in and what the desired outcome is. And like in my business, which is in, information security, cyber security, I mean, our expectation is we measure our customer success managers based on how much they know about their customer, what the customer's critical success factors are. And typically we have to do that at least once a quarter for large customers too, because that gives you the runway length to make some changes. Yeah. Suppose if you have a yearly or annual renewal or whatever, I mean, if you're only doing it once a year, then it's sometimes too late.
Absolutely. So that's what I mean. For your situation, that makes total sense. Oh, can you grab the mic? All right. I did want to say, there are sometimes time-based reasons to reach out. So, if you do business with higher ed, for example, they have a very specific buying process, when they start planning and when they actually buy. And so, you may, based on that, the trigger of that event happening, sort of external to their use of your product, are they, do you reach out and start having that planning session? So, I mean, I agree. I mean, but I would think that also, there's going to be other triggers that might cause a reason to resync on things. Maybe it's even in the industry, right? A data breach happens or something. That's a reason to just reach out to your customer. Not that it happened with your customer, but to realign, make sure they're good. So we have to be aware of all those different things.
The sponsor may have left the company.
Yeah. No, that's another. Yeah. So there's something that we always try to do, which is have we call it the 3x3 contact redundancy. Just always making sure that we have multiple lines of communication into a company. A little hack that I like to do is, and I don't do many hacks, but what I like to do is get emergency contacts. Just ask, can I get a second emergency contact in case something happens? It's amazing how the way that we phrase things, people are willing to do that. And now I have another contact in case this guy leaves. So.
One last question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to get your opinion on how to differentiate client success health scores between the buyer and the user, because our buyer is typically not our main user, so what their goals are and what means success to them is definitely not in line with the main users of our product and what's most interesting to them. So do you have separate health scores? Do you have a combination of health scores? Just anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably different ways to look at that. I think we need to understand what the desired outcome is of the different personas, is kind of the way I would look at that. If it's the buyer and they just need to know that they're getting an ROI or that people are actually using it, then maybe that's just a report that we send out. It has nothing to do with customer health. It's just a report that we would give them. We're not going to be able to get anything. They're not using the product. We're not getting anything from them. It's just more of a report that we have to provide. The end user, I mean, that's a key persona, right? That's often very important. What do they need to achieve? And really, it comes down to understanding their job. And this is why I say go sit with them. When was the last time you saw how they actually do their job? Where do you fit into their world? It's cool to be able to tell, to come up with some goal for the use of your product as if your product is the most important thing in the universe. It is the most important thing in your universe because that's what you work with every day, but maybe it's not with them. And so we need to understand how they actually do their job. What do they need what do they need to actually have happen to be successful? And if you're gonna build a health score around that, which is fine, build it around that. What needs to happen for them to feel successful? Now, that may differ from a health score that's sort of a roll-up of everything for the company to know that they're getting, that they're on the right track towards their goal as a company. But I wouldn't worry about so much calling it a health score at that point. I just, I want to know, are they doing what's necessary? And, are they being taken care of in the way that is appropriate? Are there, maybe that is where we say if they're opening sport tickets and stuff, that's really important.
Well, did you feel like you were taken care of tonight? Big round of applause to Lincoln for taking care of our success. Always an inspiration listening to you. I love the way he coins stuff like orchestra, and the F word really means like feel. All right, if you feel good about tonight, stick around, network with each other. You know who's looking for a job, who just said something really smart, go compliment them, ask them more about it, right? A lot of good sharing tonight. Next time we meet, I believe it's on March 15th for happy hour, networking, and some constructed conversation similar to what we had tonight at the early start of the evening. And so please check the website. Sean will post something about that, and we'll email you as well. Bring your friends next time. It's going to be really epic. All right, cue music. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Stick around. Come say hi.
People who use profanity have been proven to be smarter, happier, and have greater integrity. Sir Lincoln's is through the roof.
Yeah, I don't know why the music line went there.
Thank you for that awesome moderation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
No, it was really good. I mean, I'm a distinguished Toastmaster.
Oh,
so
really?
from the
Oh my
communication
gosh,
perspective and
thank
stuff,
you.
and when we're